Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well, and welcome to the start of another video series. I know I just started another one like a month ago, but I can have two series at once. I can do whatever I want forever, because I'm an adult. And I'm very excited about this one. It's called Adaptation Exploration, and in it, we're going to look at different adaptations of famous characters and stories, to see how they decide to tell these stories. How we judge these adaptations will kind of change a bit, but generally speaking, we're going to see how closely they stick to the source material, or how they deviate, and if that's a good thing, which I think is going to be interesting with our first character, Superman. Right off the bat, you might be thinking that it'll be pretty hard to come up with source material for a comic book character as old and popular as Superman. And you're right. It was something I was really struggling with at first. If we were just trying to see if it followed the story of the comics accurately, that would be a different story. But this video is looking at Superman as a character and if these adaptations treat him well. And that's a little bit harder to nail down. Because if James Gunn's movie has told us anything, it's that people have very different opinions about what Superman is supposed to be. And there's so much Superman material available that you can technically find a comic book that supports your opinion regardless of how ridiculous that opinion might be. So instead of trying to decide which comic should be considered the gold standard, I decided to get help from the one person whose opinion I value more than anyone's on the internet. I asked my husband what he thought made Superman, Superman. His response was very simple, and I think hit the nail on the head. What makes Superman Superman is his heart. If Superman had been born with no powers whatsoever, he would still be doing everything in his power to help the world and make it a better place. And this is going to be our guiding light for adaptations. Regardless of anything that happens, at his core, Superman is a good, kind person doing his best to help people and make the world a better place. There are more specific things I'll get into, like how he interacts with others and what personality he should have, but above all else, the fact that he is a good and kind person must remain central to his characterization. With that in mind, we're going to look at three different adaptations today: The Death of Superman, Man of Steel, and Superman from 1978. I picked these ones specifically because 1, they seem pretty well known and somewhat well regarded, and 2, they're movies I'd never seen before. Because while this series is intended to be introspective analysis, it's also a great opportunity to get me to consume new media. And hey, maybe one of these is going to be new for you too. I'm very excited to get into this, so I think we should get started. Grab some water, your favorite Superman-themed snack, and get comfortable. Today we'll be taking a look at the heart of Superman. The Death of Superman is probably the movie I knew the least about going into it. I knew I wanted to have at least one animated movie, but I didn't really know where to start, so I ended up just looking at the list of animated Superman movies on IMDb and picking the one with the highest rating. Side note, are there really only 8 animated Superman movies? I don't know, I was kind of expecting there to be a lot more than this. Anyway, in case it wasn't obvious, The Death of Superman is about the death of Superman. Or at least the first movie is. A funny thing happened when me and my husband went to rent this movie. Instead of finding The Death of Superman, we found The Death and Return of Superman. Thinking that they just decided to rename the movie at some point, we rented it and started watching. And it wasn't until Superman was dying about halfway through that I thought, wait a second, this is pretty long for an animated movie, and this feels more like a climax than a midpoint. Is this actually just 2 movies mashed together? And lo and behold, that's exactly what it was. Despite the summary literally saying that it was 2 different movies put together, me and my husband both missed it, and so we ended up watching 2 Superman movies for the price of 1. In case you haven't seen these movies, here's a refresher. In Death of Superman, we take a look at Superman's personal life as he considers telling Lois Lane his secret identity. He's willing to show her the rocket he came to Earth in, but can't seem to open up to her as Clark. In the meantime, an asteroid destroys a ship full of astronauts on its way to Earth, and from that asteroid crawls Doomsday, an alien-killing machine bent on destroying anything and everything it can get its hands on. The Justice League can't handle it, so it's up to Superman. Before going to help, Clark reveals his identity to Lois and leaves a note saying that he loves her. From here we get an extended fight sequence with a brief Lex Luthor intermission before Superman has seemingly reached his limit. Lois interrupts Doomsday before he can continue beating Superman's face into the ground and says that she loves Superman too. This gives Superman the push he needs for one last hit on Doomsday, which finally kills him, but causes Superman to die as well. The whole world has a funeral for him, but not long after, his body and the Kryptonian rocket ship from earlier disappear, and an end credits scene shows Superman alternates appearing. Reign of the Supermen starts 6 months after Superman's death, with 4 new Supermen having emerged. There's Superboy, a clone of Superman created by Lex Luthor, Steel, an armored Superman who definitely isn't Engineer John Henry Irons from the first movie, the Eradicator, who at this point is very mysterious, and Cyborg Superman, who claims that he's the real Superman resurrected using Kryptonian technology. Superboy and the Justice League are assigned to guard the president at the unveiling of the new Watchtower, but then parademons attack, and it's Cyborg Superman who happens to be in the right place at the right time to rescue her. And the Justice League all happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when the parademon portal falls on them, presumably killing them. Lois and Steel work together and find that Cyborg Superman is actually Hank Henshaw, one of the astronauts supposedly killed by the asteroid in the first movie. He blames Superman for his wife dying in the same incident and has set out to destroy his legacy. With the president now trusting him implicitly, Hank uses his new influence to convince people to become part of the Cyber Core militia, where they get messed up by mother boxes and turned into these mindless police state people. Steel tracks the Eradicator back to the Fortress of Solitude and discovers that Superman has been slowly healing in the Kryptonian rocket ship, with the Eradicator being a sort of personification of the technology designed to protect him as he heals. Superman wakes up, alive but depowered, and Lex Luthor and Lois Lane discover that Hank is being controlled by Darkseid, who originally created Doomsday and started this whole thing in the first place. Lex Luthor and Lois work together to free the Justice League from their extra-dimensional prison, while Superman, Superboy, and Steel head back to Metropolis to help. Henshaw is able to break free of Darkseid's control and close the portal that's letting him come, but he's still super evil, so he decides to kill Lois about it, all while the Cyber Core under his control attacks everyone. Superman arrives in time to save Lois, and after a good dose of vitamin D, he's back to full power and successfully defeats Henshaw. Martian Manhunter helps to make sure no one realizes that Clark Kent is Superman, Superboy goes to live with Ma and Pa Kent, and the day is ultimately saved. In some ways, I'm really glad I was able to see both of these movies instead of just the first one. These two movies are very interconnected, and even though the death of Superman is intended to stand on its own, these two were obviously meant to be viewed as a complete arc together. On the other hand, it makes the viewing experience very odd because these two movies are quite different in tone. The sequel, Reign of the Supermen, generally plays like your average animated superhero movie. Buildings will get destroyed and people are freaking out, but everyone is kind of fine, right? People might get thrown into walls or grabbed, but they're never in any actual danger beyond scratches and wearing a cast later. This is not at all what Death of Superman is like. People die in this movie. People die horribly in this movie. Doomsday smashes people into red paste on a regular basis. It's not invincible levels of violence, but it is much more than you would expect. And I think this is very intentional and a good choice for Death of Superman. Because up until Doomsday arrives, we're very much in the territory we're used to. There's a little blood and people get thrown around and knocked out, but it's nothing too crazy. Superman will knock people around, but they're in super high-tech mech suits, so no one actually gets hurt. But as soon as Doomsday arrives, all bets are off. People are dying left and right, crushed and smashed and torn to literal pieces because Doomsday is different. This is not your typical hulking monster. This is a serious threat, and the movie acts like it. Everything in this movie is building up the fact that this is not a normal enemy. Superman is the only one who can handle this, and it's becoming clear that the only way to handle it is permanently. I think the level of violence in this movie is very well thought out, and it's necessary for this story to work as well as it does. You genuinely believe that the characters are in danger, and that Doomsday is just going to keep going unless something drastic is done. This willingness for the movie to kill characters is a necessary part of making you understand the severity of the situation. The only problem is, it makes the second half of the death and return of Superman feel extremely off balance in terms of threat. Going from, this guy will crush your head like a grape, to, oh yeah, that energy blast is non-lethal, didn't you know? Is a very weird feeling. The first movie takes pains to establish that the stakes are real, the characters we love are in actual danger, and then the sequel keeps putting them in situations where they should be getting hurt, and nothing happens. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with this inherently. I don't have a problem with people never really getting hurt in superhero movies. It's part of the genre, it's usually for kids. I don't need blood and guts everywhere. But the first movie did a lot of work to subvert the expectation that everyone was going to be fine no matter what happened. And when you subvert those expectations and then go back to the status quo of before, it makes the plot armor really, really obvious and jarring. It's not necessarily a deal breaker. I still enjoyed my time with this mashed up movie. I just thought I'd mention this because it really messes with your expectations of what's going to happen. Like, in Reign of the Superman, a bunch of people get together to go protest against the Cybercorps. And even though we hadn't seen any sort of violence in a while, me and my husband still looked at each other like, are all these protesters going to die? It kind of seems like they're all going to die. To be clear, they don't die, they're completely fine. But that makes it even weirder that everyone in the Cybercorps does eventually die. Yeah, you see all these people that volunteer? After Henshaw gets defeated and their connection is severed, they all die. I was fully expecting there to be a moment where you think they're all dead before they start twitching and slowly waking up. But no, that doesn't happen. This lady just cries over her dead boyfriend and the screen fades to black. It's not even acknowledged in the happy ending monologue. All these people just die and it's never mentioned outside of this scene. It feels really weird. Putting all of that aside, how does this movie treat Superman as a character? Personally, I really like this portrayal of Superman. He's very powerful, but also friendly, kind, and extremely earnest. He remembers the stories of people he saved, and the world is better because he saved them. He seems like someone you could easily be friends with, and it's clear from the start that people like him for who he is, not just what he does. One thing I found interesting was the difference between Superman and Clark. Superman is very confident and self-assured, while Clark is much quieter and less sure of his actions. I'm sure this is partially because he plays up his bumbliness when he's Clark, but it also felt like he was genuinely less comfortable when he didn't have the cape on. I don't usually like the implication that Clark is just a mask Superman puts on when he needs to hide his identity. I prefer it when he's more connected to humanity than that, but for this portrayal, I think this works really well. A big part of the conflict in the first movie is that Lois wants to get to know Clark, and Superman doesn't really know how to be Clark. You get the impression that most of the people in his life are only close to one half of him. He knows how dangerous his work is, so he's made an effort to separate the two parts of his life. He knows how to be generally likable as Clark, but struggles to come up with anything deeper when pressed. He's the same person as Superman, but because he's terrified of anyone realizing that, he ends up pushing people away. And now that he's falling in love, he's struggling to bridge that gap. This is all fairly standard secret identity stuff, but it's being elevated because you know that you're watching the death of Superman. Unlike the other characters in this movie, as an audience member, you are very aware that there is a timer ticking down, and unless Superman gets his act together, he's not gonna have any chance. There's the potential that this will he tell her, won't he tell her would get annoying, but thankfully Clark makes up his mind and tells Lois before it goes on for too long. The first movie honestly does a really good job of showing how needed and well-liked Superman is. At pretty much every turn we can see why he's as appreciated as he is. However, I will say that in an effort to make Superman feel powerful, this movie kind of does the rest of the Justice League dirty. Hardly anyone lasts more than 10 seconds against Doomsday, to the point where it's almost distracting. I think this was another attempt to make Doomsday seem unstoppable, but instead of making him seem powerful, it just kind of made the Justice League look like chumps. Especially since the way Doomsday would take them out often felt really contrived. Like, oh no, he just happened to throw Martian Manhunter into a gas station, which explodes and takes him out for the rest of the fight. Oh, he just happens to get a wild swing correct and take out Flash in one hit. He just happens to beat up Hawkman. Okay, this one isn't contrived, it's just kind of sad. If you're a Hawkman fan, I'm sorry. He gets one good hit in and then just gets wailed on and is never relevant again. I am so sorry. Although, I guess it could be worse. Aquaman didn't even make it into the sequel. In the arms of the angel. I understand that this is a Superman movie, and that we want to get Superman and Doomsday fighting as quickly as possible. But when Wonder Woman came on screen for her turn against Doomsday, I literally said out loud, please let her do something cool, please just let her be cool. Which I don't think is a very good sign. For the record, she does get to be cool for about a minute and a half, which I do appreciate. I just wish that much care was given to the other characters, so this actually feels like a bunch of powerful people struggling, instead of a schoolyard bully giving wedgies to first graders. This problem isn't as bad in Reign of Superman, mostly because the Justice League doesn't get to do much, but Flash definitely should have been able to escape this falling portal. There are 3 separate reaction shots between them noticing it and it actually hitting. He definitely could have run out and probably saved, like, at least 2 other people. Speaking of the second movie, it's interesting because even though Superman is absent for most of it, he still manages to get characterization. A big part of the story is how these new Supermen are all claiming to be Superman in one way or another. And in doing that, they show very clearly what Superman isn't. They're not all inherently evil, in fact some of them really are trying to uphold Superman's ideals, but every time one of them claims to be the real Superman, there's a little voice in your head that goes, no, you're not. You could never. And you remember what I said at the start about how if Superman didn't have powers, he'd still be doing everything he could to help people? That literally happens in this movie. Despite being depowered, Clark immediately goes back because he wants to help. And I think that's a pretty quintessential Superman move. Of course, as much as I enjoyed myself with these 2 movies, there are some problems. The death of Superman is about the death of Superman, but something that comes with that is Doomsday, and the fact that Superman kills him. Superman generally does not kill. There are times in the comics where he does, but those are generally Elseworld stories, extreme circumstances, or literally not his fault. And I think that's the way it should be. Some might argue that it would be better and easier if certain superheroes with a no-kill rule tossed their morals aside and killed all their villains. But I would argue that maybe being a hero isn't really about doing the easy thing. Superman is an unspeakably powerful character who has decided to use that power to do good in the world. And I think that a character like that would value life extremely highly. If you're fighting for a better world, you have to believe that it can get better. And that means extending kindness to even the worst imaginable. In case you couldn't tell, I am very much a believer that Superman shouldn't kill. So you might be surprised when I say that I don't have a problem with how Doomsday was handled. The movie does an excellent job of showing that Doomsday is not a normal threat. This is not something they can deal with the normal way, and everything in this movie takes pains to emphasize that. But what's equally important is that Superman doesn't survive. A Superman that kills can no longer be Superman, and by making the ultimate sacrifice, this remains true. The only circumstance in which Superman can kill Doomsday and still remain the hero we know is if he also dies in the fight, and the movie pulls this off excellently. Some people take issue with the fact that it's Lois that prompts the final blow, because to them it implies that she's the only one he actually cares about, and I personally don't agree with this. It's true that some adaptations will use her that way, but I think in this case, it makes sense. The central conflict so far has been between her and Clark. He's come clean about his identity and feelings, but she hasn't had a chance to respond. And now that it's looking like the end, she's taking the final opportunity to tell him how she feels. And I fully believe that Lois expected, or at least was prepared, to die here. She's not stupid, she knows how powerful this guy is, and while she starts with defiance, she knows the only thing she can really do is make sure that Clark knows how she feels. This is a natural conclusion for the arc that the two have been having. And just for the record, I don't think it's strange that Superman has a little bit more urgency when it comes to his loved ones. If you had to lift a car off of someone, the hysterical strength would probably be a little more potent if that person was your mother. Overall, I think these two movies, that I thought were one movie, have a very good interpretation of Superman. He's kind, generous, and dedicated to the world, but he's also awkward, sassy, and just a little bit of a dork. He feels like a real person, and it's very nice to see an interpretation of Superman with so much thought put into it. Which isn't something I think I can say for the next movie we're looking at. Okay, I know a lot of people like Man of Steel, and there are things to like about this movie, but watching it for the first time in 2025, I just did not feel impressed. This is not a very good Superman movie, and I found myself pretty confused about what it was even trying to say. Now, before anyone gets too mad, Henry Cavill is not the problem in this movie. And I'm not just saying that because he's my husband's lifelong celebrity crush. He looks like Superman, he has the acting skill to be both charming and earnest, and when the movie actually just lets him be Superman, he does a very good job. The problem is there's only like 3 scenes of him doing that, because Henry Cavill is playing Superman in a movie that is fundamentally cynical about the idea of Superman existing. Quick recap of the plot for people who haven't seen this movie since 2013. The planet Krypton is collapsing in on itself, and this guy, Jor-El, predicted it, but the government doesn't want to do anything about it, so he steals this genetic codex thing and sends it and his newborn son Kal-El to Krypton, after which he's killed by General Zod because he's doing a coup and wanted the codex. Zod is then imprisoned in the Phantom Zone and Krypton collapses. From here, Kal-El, aka Clark Kent, grows up in Kansas and develops superhuman powers as he gets older. which his adopted dad, Jonathan Kent, encourages him to hide. Jonathan eventually dies in a tornado because he didn't want Clark to reveal his powers, and Clark feels so guilty about it that he becomes a drifter who chucks his identity and relocates anytime he can no longer resist the urge to help people. Lois Lane from the Daily Planet is sent to report on this weird thing found in the Arctic, which turns out to be a Kryptonian ship. Clark goes to investigate and learns about Krypton from the ship's AI, which is kind of also his dead dad's ghost. Lois follows him, and Clark has to save her from the ship's security system, after which the ship flies away and Clark starts experimenting with what he can do. Lois isn't able to publish her story normally, so she does her own investigating, but decides not to pursue it after actually talking to Clark and getting the backstory of John Kent dying in a tornado. However, Clark's identity isn't safe because Zod and his allies have escaped from the Phantom Zone, and they're here to terraform Earth into a brand new Krypton. It turns out that the genetic codex Zod wanted was put into Clark's DNA, so Zod captures him, and also Lois, and extracts some DNA so we can start conquering. Superman and Lois escape and work with the military to destroy the giant terraforming machine and send Zod's troops back to the Phantom Zone. After this, Zod goes completely off the rails and attacks Superman, and eventually they have a fight that culminates in Superman having to break Zod's neck to save this family. And sometime after that, Superman convinces the government to stop looking into him and gets a job at the Daily Planet as Clark Kent. Okay, in case it wasn't clear, I'm not the biggest fan of this plotline, but I'm especially frustrated with it because there are pieces of it that almost work. Superman being unsure of his place in the world and living as a drifter while he tries to figure it out, that's an interesting concept. I think I could watch a movie about that. Jonathan Kent encouraging Clark to hide his powers because he's worried about how the world will react. I can understand why he'd be worried about that. A figure from Superman's past has come to the Earth to threaten mass destruction. That's just normal for him. There are lots of ideas here that I don't have a problem with. But the problem, once again, is that the movie itself seems extremely reluctant to just let Superman exist at all. So much of this movie is just Clark Kent doing something slightly heroic, and the entire world and writer's room berating him for it. I understand, in a vacuum, why Jonathan Kent would want Clark to keep his powers hidden. He's his dad, he's worried about him and doesn't want him to get hurt. But how on earth did that translate to him telling Clark that he should have let all his classmates die? That's stupid. This movie is so obsessed with the fact that Clark is an alien and different that it seems to forget that he's also heroic and likable, and that he was raised by loving people who want the best for him. The way John talks to Clark most of the time, it seems almost like he's scared of him, like he's decided he has to keep this alien in check for the sake of the world's safety, and it's so off-putting to watch. Like in this scene, Clark is clearly upset that his attempt at doing good is being treated like a problem, and John is just like, well, you know, you're fundamentally different, and that kinda sucks, and it's probably only gonna get worse from here. Have I mentioned that you're an alien from outer space, and you can literally relate to no one? Now seems like a good time to bring that up. Pa Kent is supposed to be the one who taught Clark how to be a good man. His values of truth and justice and helping your neighbor are the foundation of what Clark becomes, and that's just not present here. He gives Clark talks about responsibility and the heavy burden he has to take on, but there's no care or love behind those words. It's like he's saying it out of obligation, like a royal advisor giving advice to his unwanted charge about his upcoming coronation. This moment where Clark asks if he can just keep pretending to be his son, and Jonathan responds by saying, "You are my son," should be a heartfelt moment, but it's immediately followed by him saying that Clark has another father somewhere else, and Clark is gonna have to figure it out on his own why he was sent there, which is such an incredibly isolating thing to say. how about in this moment, you reassure your son that you love him and hug him like you actually mean it? Or make sure he understands that you'll always be there for him, even though he's gonna be facing things you don't understand? I feel like that's a little more important than driving home once again that he's different and he's gonna have to deal with that by himself. And again, this is super frustrating because everything he says is like a half step to the left away from being good. Some slight tweaks to this dialogue could have done wonders. It's a classic trope that the parental figure of a hero will at some point give them a speech about how they're different, and they have a responsibility to use that power for good. This movie just decided to twist it so that the emphasis was not on doing good, but on the fact that Clark is different. This movie is supposed to be a Superman origin story, but so many of these flashback scenes feel like they'd fit better in something like Brightburn, which, in case you didn't know, is a movie about what if Superman was actually a sociopath sent here as an invading force and love didn't change anything and he killed everyone. There's a scene where Clark gets overwhelmed because his powers are developing and everything is too loud and he can see everyone's skeleton and organs, and obviously it freaks him out. So he runs and locks himself away. But eventually his mom is able to calm him down by having him focus only on her voice. He's able to ground himself through that, and this scene is very effective at showing the bond between them, and exploring the difficulties of having Superman's powers in a very cool way. But immediately before his mom arrives, Superman uses his heat vision to heat up the doorknob and burn the teacher's hand. And this moment is designed to be scary. There's really sinister music playing, and everyone is sitting outside the closet muttering ominously to themselves. And I'm just looking at this and wondering, why include that part? Because what it says on a metatextual level is that Clark is able and willing to hurt people. It would be one thing if he was glaring at the doorknob and he accidentally heated it up and realized afterward that he'd burned his teacher. That version of the scene would imply that he has power, but he can't control it very well. And you could use it as a lead-in to his parents giving him a talk about the importance of keeping your anger in check. And that would be an important lesson and give us insight into what kind of person Clark grows up to be. But with the way the movie does it, it instead implies that Clark is only barely holding back from hurting people all the time. And it's only by luck that he hasn't snapped yet. And the other flashbacks continue to enforce this. I have no idea why this angle was so important for this movie, but it is! And it gives the film a very confusing tone that's completely at odds with who Superman is. The point of Superman is that he's extremely powerful, and he chooses to use that power for good. It's a message of hope, the idea that someone with infinite power decides that the best way to use that power is to help people. In this movie, he only becomes Superman because the hologram ghost of his dead dad tells him it's his destiny. And I feel like maybe more focus should have been placed on the fact that he was a good person to begin with. I generally try to keep things positive on this channel, so I want to say that there are individual scenes in this movie that I really like. When Superman decides to turn himself in to General Zod and he and Lois get a moment to talk, he genuinely feels like Superman. He's clearly very powerful, but he lets himself be handcuffed because he doesn't want to cause too much of a fuss. He's friendly and funny and polite and feels so much like Superman that I genuinely feel robbed that more of the movie isn't like this. Because, yeah, when I said there was only like 3 scenes where Henry Cavill acts like Superman, I meant it. He doesn't start actually doing Superman things until like an hour in. He doesn't even have the name Superman at the start of this scene. Lois gives him that name during the interrogation. The movie has to be physically dragged into allowing Clark to put on the cape, and most of the scenes where Superman is allowed to exist are fight scenes, where he doesn't get to talk and superpowered people smack each other through walls at various angles. Speaking of which, I knew everyone and their mom had made the point about the horrific level of collateral damage in this movie, but oh my gosh, I was not expecting it to be so bad. It's to the point where it feels almost intentional that we're thinking about how many people are dying in every scene. Like, you didn't have to animate dozens of people getting caught in this gravity blast and smashing into the ground, but wow, it's definitely obvious how many people are dead. Why did you bother showing all these people running and hiding if you were going to smash these buildings to dust minutes later? We saw everyone hide in there. We know they're all dead. What's the point of that? And why isn't Superman trying to help them get to safety, which he literally told them that they should do? To borrow a point from overly sarcastic productions, wouldn't it have been much more interesting if Superman was trying to fight these guys and keep civilians safe at the same time? It would make this fight so much more dynamic and tense. And hey, if you really feel like sucking up to the military and having them look good, maybe having them arrive and take over evacuation would be better than showing them firing missiles into an occupied town. Just saying. I recognize that I'm doing a lot of complaining, and I'm sorry to anyone that genuinely likes this movie, but the more I think about it, the more I find things that don't make sense for Superman or just don't make sense at all. For example, why is Lois taken along with Superman when he turns himself into Zod? Zod specifically asks for her, and it is never explained why. I understand why she needs to be there from a writing perspective. She's the one who conveniently gets tossed in a room with this control panel and helps them all escape. But why does Zod want her? She apparently got interrogated the same way Clark did, but why? She's not like an emissary of Earth or anything. She's a reporter, and she's spoken to Clark for maybe a total of 10 minutes by this point. She knows about the Phantom Zone later in this movie, which she could have only learned about in her weird interrogation dream sequence, but why would Zod and the others have told her about that? And hey, why later in the movie is she on the military plane sent to destroy this big terraform thing? She is a random untrained civilian. Why on earth would they let her come? The key thing they need to use is not coded to her. Literally anyone can use it, and someone else does use it. Why is she allowed on this extremely dangerous and critical mission, other than to almost die and get saved by Superman? Because apparently Lois is only here to get saved by Superman, and the only way to make her a damsel in distress is to put her in situations she has no business being in. As another example of weirdness, this movie can't seem to decide if Jor-El is a bad person or not. Zod says stuff at the start about preserving pure bloodlines or whatever, and Jor-El is like, who decides what bloodlines get to exist? Just you? So it's broadly implied that he's against eugenics, which, thank goodness, but a bunch of the other stuff he says implies that he definitely thinks of Kryptonians as a superior race. Like, he sends Clark to a planet with a yellow sun, specifically because he knows the yellow radiation will make him cooler and better than everyone else. He infuses his DNA with the genetic codex of Krypton so that he can continue their race even if all of them die. This isn't a rescue mission he's doing because he loves his son. This is so their race can continue beyond their hubris. Laura is really sentimental and sad that they'll never get to see their son grow up, and Jor-El is just like, but honey, our species lives on this way. Why are you sad? The ghost hologram version of Jor-El later says that he was sent here to guide the people of Earth, which I guess is slightly better, but it still implies that Clark is somehow magically a great person who will inherently be better than literally everyone else on Earth. They keep trying to show that he's a good person, but what Jor-El is doing is just what Zod wanted to do in a different font, which was probably the point of them being like dark reflections or something, but it never gets fully addressed or refuted or questioned by Superman or anyone else in the story. So Jor-El is kind of just xenophobic on a planet-sized level, and it's never explored before he gets wiped off the face of the planet. And also, hey Jor-El, Why doesn't your wife get a hologram ghost? Why is it only you that gets to give really cryptic advice to your adult son? And don't tell me it's because Jarrell died close to the ship or whatever. He and Laura die in the same building, barely a room away from one another. And if this isn't the same building, then it should have been more clear because every building on Krypton has this same basic, ugly architecture and I hate it. I could go on like this for probably a long time, but I must hold back because this isn't a Man of Steel video, it's a Superman video, and we have other things we need to get to. But there is one thing that I unfortunately have to address, and it's the neck snap. Superman kills Zod in this movie, and for the life of me, I can't figure out why they decided this was necessary. I tried several times to write about why this moment is contrived and stupid, but every time I did, it just turned into a super long paragraph of me ranting, and it was getting really mean-spirited and super long because I kept riling myself up thinking about it, so I'm gonna try a slightly different approach. From a meta writing perspective, why would a writer want to have Superman kill Zod in this way? By doing this, what are they trying to say about Superman and Superman stories in general? They obviously know that killing people isn't normal for Superman. That's why they had to come up with 10 different hoops to make it seem like this was the only thing Clark could do. They obviously know that Superman doesn't like killing because they have Henry Cavill react with absolute agony afterward. So why have him do it at all? Superman killing Zod is an intentional subversion of what we're expecting, and I cannot figure out what it's trying to say. Is it meant to imply that Superman should be killing his villains? Clearly not, because it doesn't end with Superman stoically wiping away a tear or Lois telling him that he had no choice. This is clearly something he did not want to do, and the story doesn't seem to frame it as something absolutely necessary. We don't even see the family saved afterward. They just poof out of existence as soon as they stop being in danger. Are they just here, awkwardly witnessing Clark's breakdown? Or is Superman actually crying because he snapped the neck the wrong way and they're in bloody chunks off screen? Once again, I had to turn to my husband for clarity on this, and he figures it was probably done to show that this is a dark and serious world. And, he's probably right. That probably was the intent here. And that upsets me, because it indicates a fundamental misunderstanding of what Superman is supposed to be. If the world is dark, Superman should get brighter. He's a symbol of hope, a fundamentally good person trying to do good, no matter how bad things get or how hurt he is. Having him kill someone just to make a point about how sad the world is feels so antithetical to what he's meant to represent, and I just really don't like it at all. Especially since it literally doesn't come up again. After the screen fades to black, we come back several months later and Superman is doing just fine and getting a job at the Daily Planet. It's not even a satisfying conclusion to the fight. It just happens out of nowhere and their confrontation just ends. It just feels like a pointless, edgy decision made for the sake of being edgy. I knew a little bit about Man of Steel before watching it, and I knew I probably wasn't going to like it very much. But I wanted to watch it anyway, because I had hoped that I could gain some sort of appreciation for it. As you can see, that didn't really happen. I didn't enjoy this movie very much at all. I'm sure there are people that do, but I'm sorry, I'm just not one of them. The effects work is really impressive for a movie from 2013. Henry Cavill is a very good actor, and I'm sad they didn't let him just be a nice Superman who helps people. And if you don't know about or care about Superman as a character, this is probably a decently fun watch. I'm sorry I don't have more good things to say. I just think this movie is very much not for me. And I don't think it did a good job of portraying Superman. I'm gonna give this movie a final score of 3 out of 10 Aquamans, and hopefully this next one won't get me quite so bent out of shape. Now, before we get into this next one, I just have to make a quick point. This is a movie from 1978. It's a classic, but the thing about classic old movies is that you kind of need to put yourself in the mindset of the audience of the time to really get them. Filmmaking has changed a lot since then, and most of the time, if you go from a modern perspective, you're gonna end up thinking that this old movie is boring and long and dumb. I enjoyed this movie, but I think part of the reason I did is because I tried to put myself in the shoes of a 1970s audience member and meet it on its own terms. It's not a bad movie, but it is a very old one, and I just want to keep that in mind going forward. And also, please forgive how crunchy this footage looks. It's the quality of the copy I found. With all that being said, this movie is really fun. It does something I haven't seen many other adaptations do, and that's let Superman be silly. Part of it is due to the very old visual effects, but I've also never seen any other Superman property make Superman this genuinely goofy. He's a massive dork, especially after he grows up and starts being played by Christopher Reeve. Most adaptations have Superman do something clumsy or silly as Clark, but then in the same scene they have him subtly use his powers just to remind you that he's not actually silly, he's just acting. That is not the case with this movie. Clark is just dorky and clumsy, and he only occasionally gets to also be cool in the same scene. It's great. I really like this portrayal of Superman because he's so much more goofy than what we're used to seeing. And he's also more mischievous, which is an angle that I haven't seen very often. He's genuinely earnest and kind, but he also uses his bumbling persona to be very cheeky about things and get away with it, and it's really fun to watch.
I don't think that he would lend himself to any cheap promotion schemes, though, Mr. White.
Exactly how would you know that, Kent?
Well, just first impression.
I got where I am with guts, compassion, elbow grease, and something you're sadly lacking in, son.
Humility. Is it worth risking your life over $10, 2 credit cards, a hairbrush, and a lipstick?
How did you know that?
For what?
You just described the exact contents of my purse.
Wild guess.
The only problem is it takes the movie just a little too long to get there. We start the movie on Krypton with Jor-El and the Kryptonian High Council sentencing General Zod and his conspirators to the Phantom Zone. Jor-El later warns the Council that the planet's going to explode soon, but they don't listen, so he bundles his baby off to Earth, where he's adopted by Jonathan and Martha Kent. Clark grows up fairly normal and well-adjusted, but after Jonathan dies of a heart attack, he's contacted by the glowing green crystal Jor-El left him in the spaceship. He follows it to the Arctic, where it summons/creates the Fortress of Solitude. Clark then trains with his ghost dad in the Fortress of Solitude for 12 years, yes really, and eventually emerges as Superman. He gets a job at the Daily Planet and reveals Superman to the world by saving Lois from a helicopter accident. He later meets up with Lois to be interviewed and takes her on a romantic flight around the city. This is where he actually gets the name Superman, as it's what Lois calls him in the newspaper stories. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor plans to redirect Army and Navy missile tests into the San Andreas Fault so he can sink most of California into the ocean and form a new West Coast owned entirely by him. He doesn't want Superman messing with that, so he lures him in and weakens him with this wacky green meteorite piece he stole from a museum, which he decides to name Kryptonite. He tells Superman that even if he could get free, there's no way to stop him, because he sent 2 missiles to different parts of the United States, and there's no way Superman can stop them both, even with his advanced speed. After he leaves, Lex Luthor's girlfriend eventually frees Superman after he promises to stop the missile heading towards where her mom lives. He does, but he's too late for the one in California, and severe earthquakes start. Superman's able to fly into the fault line and fix it somehow. I don't know how he does that, but he does. And then he starts mitigating the damage of the earthquakes that it caused. While he's rescuing others, though, Lois gets caught in an earthquake aftershock and dies. Superman is absolutely horrified when he finds her and flies around the Earth to reverse time, preventing both her death and the missile landing in the first place. He flies Lex to prison, Lex Luthor is revealed to be bald, and the movie ends happily. In case you couldn't tell from the summary, this movie goes to some wild places, but that's kind of why I like it. There's very real appeal to serious superhero stories, and it's the way we've been doing it for a while now. But there's something so charming about superheroes that are just silly and ridiculous, because at the core, superheroes are a little silly and ridiculous. And that's okay. It's okay for the spandex man to do some goofy stuff. In fact, I think that was part of the original point. Like I said, I really enjoy the way this movie does Superman. He has extremely dorky energy that I find very endearing, but he also frequently uses his Clark Kent persona to make little inside jokes to himself in a way that I think is just hilarious. Don't get it twisted, despite his clumsiness being an act, he is still very much a dork.
Well, I certainly hope this little incident hasn't put you off flying, miss. Statistically speaking, of course, it's still the safest way to travel.
But the way he uses his Clark Kent persona is so funny to me. He constantly makes comments that to anyone else seem just a little odd, but to anyone who knows who he actually is, it's extremely obvious he's just having a little chuckle to himself. Like he genuinely is just having a great time pretending to be somewhat incompetent. There's a scene where him and Lois are getting mugged, and he's very clearly trying to handle it without being obvious, and at one point he needs to cover up the fact that he caught the bullet when the gun went off. So he pretends to faint, and Lois is vaguely annoyed with him. But when he reveals the bullet, there's genuinely a fourth wall break, and it's so funny. Look at his smirking face, he's so pleased he managed to get away with this. He's such a goober, but it somehow never takes away from the fact that he's Superman who saves people. It's great. He's very serious about saving people and doing the right thing, but it feels like the way he acts at work is his opportunity to have a little fun, even if he's the only one who gets the joke. Of course, I did mention that it takes us a while to get here, and that's true. The stuff beforehand isn't necessarily bad, it just takes us a while to get to Superman shenanigans. The first half of this movie is dedicated to establishing Superman's whole deal, his backstory, his morals, everything. And that makes a lot of sense. Nowadays, the concept of a superhero is extremely well known, and Superman himself is known to nearly everyone on at least a basic level. But I don't think you could really say that for the time period when the movie came out. Obviously, he was a popular enough character to get a movie made about him, but I don't think you could expect that the general populace would show up to the theater knowing exactly who he was. So yeah, this backstory makes sense. I just wish it didn't last for basically half the movie. Like I said at the start, this is an older movie, so the pacing is basically slower by default. But the fact remains that by the time this movie is satisfied with its backstory retelling, there's only an hour left. And I think that's a shame. I would have loved more scenes with Christopher Reeve. However, the choices the movie makes with the backstory are interesting, and I'd like to talk a little about them. First of all, I'm pretty sure that Man of Steel's opening on Krypton is meant to be a modernized version of this movie's opening. If I'm being honest, I think a lot of Man of Steel was trying to do this movie, but quote-unquote better. Except, I don't think it succeeded, and this movie does it better. In Man of Steel, it feels like Laura is getting really sentimental while Jor-El is just impatient. Here, these two stand on equal footing as they debate the merits of sending Kal-El to Earth specifically. There's still the sense that they think of Earth as something far below them in terms of technological advancement, but there's not the same level of "we must continue our race." Instead, it actually tells us something about their characters. From this conversation, there's the implication that Jor-El does not expect his son to receive any help on this new planet. He knew that Earth's sun and atmosphere would make his son, quote-unquote, better than everyone else, but he did that because he believed that his son would be completely alone in trying to survive. The yellow sun means that his son doesn't need to eat, so even if no one finds him or wants to help him, he's not going to starve. His molecular density there makes him invulnerable to threat, so if anything tries to attack him, he'll still be safe. and the changes to his physiology would mean that he can run faster than anything that could hurt him. More than anything, Jor-El is determined to make sure that no matter what, his son will be safe. He knows that he can't do much of anything else, but this he can do. He can make sure that his son is safe. Laura, meanwhile, counters with the fact that their son will be lonely there. He'll look like the people of Earth, but never be one of them. He'll never know his parents, or his heritage, or anything. And for this, Jor-El presents a solution, or at the very least, the best they can do. The ship is made with crystals holding the knowledge of many galaxies, and with them, Jor-El records a final blessing for his son before sending him away. It's a very effective scene that characterizes both of Clark's Kryptonian parents as people who loved him and gave him everything they had, even in the terrible circumstances. It's genuinely really sweet and meaningful, and I'm very happy they took this angle instead of whatever this was. Okay, I'm sorry, I'll stop jabbing at Man of Steel now. One aspect of this movie that I haven't mentioned yet is Lex Luthor. This movie has Lex Luthor, and he is such a delight to watch. He is as silly as Superman, maybe even more silly, and I think that works very well. I think the character of Lex Luthor can be difficult to write because most people don't realize that he's supposed to be intimidating and also kind of ridiculous. Like, he's an extremely powerful and smart person who also is obsessed with Superman and will sabotage himself all the time if he thinks it will hurt Superman somehow. He is a smart person, and he knows he's a smart person, and his ego is his downfall every time. He could genuinely do so much good as a person, but he's so wrapped up in his own little nemesis game that he just never does what he's clearly capable of doing to help humanity. This movie maybe leans into the silliness more than people might like, but personally, I was having the time of my life. In this movie, he's a real estate agent who's decided that the best way to gain money is to create a brand new coastline. And that's hilarious and amazing. And if the San Andreas Fault actually worked like that, it's actually a pretty solid plan. But the way he gains control of these missiles is so funny because they have to physically go to where the missiles are and change the coordinates. So he, sends his henchmen to do it while he disguises himself as an ambulance driver for the fake car crash they created. And then he finds out that his assistant did it wrong, so they have to do it again, and he wears a completely different disguise. The dynamic between him and his assistants is almost like Three Stooges level. I don't know, I was just enjoying myself so much. I understand if people find this a little corny and ridiculous, but it was fun. It's fun. This movie is fun.
And Otis, by the way, next time, put my robe on after I'm out of the pool.
And yet, this movie still manages to pull off the balance I was talking about. Because when he manages to trick Superman into being near this kryptonite, it's genuinely a little bit tense, a little bit scary. He's reveling in the fact that he's hurting Superman, and he just dumps him into this pool. I don't know if Superman can drown, but he's kind of acting like he can, and it's really not great for him. Wow, can someone help him? Thank you. Like I said, I know a lot of people will probably find this just too campy, but I just really enjoyed it. Maybe it was because it was right after watching Man of Steel, or I just wasn't expecting this movie to try and be funny, but I had a great time. I really loved this movie. I don't know if I'll watch it again because old pacing means that my ADHD was struggling a little bit, but there are so many scenes that I just want to look up out of context, and I think that says something. This movie had an excellent Lex Luthor, a pretty good Lois Lane, and a very good Superman. And if you want to see a very classic old movie, I would highly recommend this one. Genuinely just a great time. We've now finished with the adaptations I wanted to get into in detail, But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about James Gunn's recent Superman movie. I might have little quibbles about it, but this is such a good movie. I'm not gonna go super into detail about this movie, because it's still really new, and I just want people to go see it even more, but I will say that I genuinely love this movie. It is so wonderfully earnest in all the ways that I love, and I think it's the only movie that got me crying because I was just so happy. I know that sounds dramatic, but I genuinely left the theater wanting nothing more than to go back and see it a second time. It's such a wonderfully positive and genuine movie, and I really appreciate it for that. I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but I just need to say, go watch this movie. It's so nice. Superman is just such a lovely guy in this movie, and he gets to be silly, but also dramatic and serious. And it's a fantastic time for literally everyone. The people who don't like it, I think, are low-key the fun police, and you should go and watch it just to spite them. But yeah, in case it wasn't clear, I think this version of Superman is amazing. I love him, basically, no notes, and I just really wanted to appreciate this movie before the video ended. There are a lot of bad things happening in the world right now. There's a lot going wrong, and a lot of angry people, and a lot of things you just can't control. And that's really hard. I know I've found it really hard. But I think that in these difficult times, having a character like Superman who's just good and decides to be good no matter what is so important. And I'm so grateful that we have characters like that to remind us that we can always do good in the world, regardless of anything else that is happening. There's a reason I end all of my videos by saying, take care of yourselves and each other, and it's because I really think that helping each other is the way to get through hard times. And maybe that's corny, but I also think it's true. And I'm very happy that we can have a character like Superman to remind us of that. And thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know in the comments below. New series, new format. If you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear about them. If I didn't look at your favorite Superman adaptation, I'm sorry. There's probably a lot of them, but I'm just one person doing this and there's limited time, so a very special thank you to all of my patrons, including but not limited to Snake and Perplexia Sphinx. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!